Chapter 16. Professor Trelawney's Prediction. Harry's euphoria at finally winning the Quidditch Cup lasted at least a week. Even the weather seemed to be celebrating. As June approached, the days became cloudless and sultry, and all anyone felt like doing was strolling onto the grounds and flopping down on the grass with several pints of iced pumpkin juice, perhaps playing a casual game of gobstones, or watching the giant squid propel itself dreamily across the surface of the lake. But they couldn't. The exams were nearly upon them, and instead of lazing around outside, the students were forced to remain inside the castle, trying to bully their brains into concentrating while enticing wafts of summer air drifted in through the windows. Even Fred and George Weasley had been spotted working. They were about to take their OWLs, Ordinary Wizarding Levels. Percy was getting ready to sit his Newts, Nastily Exhausting Wizarding Tests, the highest qualification Hogwarts offered. As Percy hoped to enter the Ministry of Magic, he needed top grades. He was becoming increasingly edgy and gave severe punishments to anybody who disturbed the quiet of the common room in the evenings. In fact, the only person who seemed more anxious than Percy was Hermione. Harry and Ron had given up asking her how she was managing to attend several classes at once, but they couldn't restrain themselves when they saw the exam timetable she had drawn up for herself. The first column read, Monday, 9 o'clock, Arithmancy, 9 o'clock, Transfiguration, lunch, 1 o'clock, Charms, 1 o'clock, Ancient Runes. Hermione, Ron said cautiously, because she was liable to explode when interrupted these days. Are you sure you've copied these times down right? What? Snapped Hermione, picking up the exam table and examining it. Yes, of course I have. Is there any point asking you how you're going to sit 2 exams at once? Said Harry. No, said Hermione shortly. Has either of you seen my copy of Numerology and Grammatica? Oh, yeah, I borrowed it for a bit of bedtime reading, said Ron, but very quietly. Hermione started shifting heaps of parchment around the table, looking for the book. Just then there was a rustle at the window, and Hedwig fluttered through it, a note clutched it tightly in her beak. It's from Hagrid, Harry said, ripping the note open. Buckbeak's appeal. It's set for the 6th. That's the day we finish exams, said Hermione, still looking everywhere for her arithmancy book. And they're coming up here to do it, said Harry, still reading from the letter. Someone from the Ministry of Magic and an executioner. Hermione looked up startled. They're bringing the executioner to the appeal? But that sounds as though they've already decided. Yeah, it does, said Harry slowly. They can't, Ron howled. I've spent ages reading up stuff for him. They can't just ignore it all. But Harry had a horrible feeling that the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had had its mind made up for it by Mr. Malfoy. Draco, who'd been noticeably subdued since Gryffindor's triumph in the Quidditch final, seemed to regain some of his old swagger over the next few days. From sneering comments Harry overheard, Malfoy was certain Buckbeak was going to be killed, and seemed thoroughly pleased with himself for bringing it about. It was all Harry could do to stop himself imitating Hermione and hitting Malfoy in the face on these occasions. And the worst thing of all was that they had no time or opportunity to go see Hagrid, because the new strict security measures had not been lifted, and Harry didn't dare retrieve his invisibility cloak from below the one-eyed witch. Exam week began, and an unnatural hush fell over the castle. Third years emerged from Transfiguration at lunchtime on Monday, limp and ashen-faced, comparing results and bemoaning the difficulty of the task they had been set, which had included turning a teapot into a tortoise. Hermione irritated the rest by fussing about how her tortoise had looked much more like a turtle, which was the least of everyone else's worries. Mine still had a spout for a tail. What a nightmare. Were the tortoises supposed to breathe steam? It still had a willow-patterned shell. Do you think she'll count that against me? Then, after a hasty lunch, it was straight back upstairs for the charms exam. Hermione had been right. Professor Flitwick did indeed test them on cheering charms. Harry slightly overdid his out of nerves, and Ron, who was partnering him, ended up in fits of hysterical laughter and had to be led away to a quiet room for an hour before he was ready to perform the charm himself. After dinner, the students hurried back to their common rooms, not to relax, but to start revising for Care of Magical Creatures, Potions, and Astronomy. Hagrid resided over the Care of Magical Creatures exam the following morning with a very preoccupied air indeed. His heart didn't seem to be in it at all. He had provided a large tub of fresh flobberworms for the class and told them that, to pass the test, their flobberworm had to still be alive at the end of 1 hour. As flobberworms flourish best if left to their own devices, it was the easiest exam any of them had ever sat, and also gave Harry, Ron and Hermione plenty of opportunity to speak to Hagrid. "Beaky's getting a bit depressed," Hagrid told them, bending low on the pretense of checking that Harry's flobberworm was still alive. "Been cooped up too long, but still, we'll know day after tomorrow, one way or the other." They had potions that afternoon, which was an unqualified disaster. Try as Harry might, he couldn't get his confusing concoction to thicken, and Snape, standing watching with an air of vindictive pleasure, scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a 0 onto his notes before moving away. Then came astronomy at midnight, up on the tallest tower, history of magic on Wednesday morning, in which Harry scribbled everything Florian Fortescue had ever told him about medieval witch hunts, while wishing he could have had one of Fortescue's chocolate nut sundaes with him in the stifling classroom. Wednesday afternoon meant herbology in the greenhouses under a baking hot sun, then back to the common room once more, with the backs of their necks sunburnt, thinking longingly of the time next day when it would all be over. Their second from last exam on Thursday morning was Defence Against the Dark Arts. Professor Lupin had compiled the most unusual exam any of them had ever taken, a sort of obstacle course outside in the sun where they had to wade across a deep paddling pool containing a Grindylow, cross a series of potholes full of redcaps, squish their way across a patch of marsh, ignoring the misleading directions from a hinky-punk, then climb into an old trunk and battle with a new boggart. "Excellent, Harry," Lupin muttered as Harry climbed out of the trunk, grinning. "Full marks." Flushed with his success, Harry hung around to watch Ron and Hermione. Ron did very well until he reached the hinky-punk, which successfully confused him into sinking waist-high into a quagmire. Hermione did everything perfectly until she reached the trunk with the boggart in it. After about a minute inside, she burst out again, screaming. "Hermione," Lupin said, startled. "What's the matter?" Professor McGonagall," Hermione gasped, pointing into the trunk. She said I failed everything." It took a little while to calm Hermione down. When at last she'd regained a grip on herself, she, Harry and Ron went back to the castle. Ron was still slightly inclined to laugh at Hermione's boggart, but an argument was averted by the sight that met them on the top of the steps. Cornelius Fudge, sweating slightly in his pinstripe cloak, was standing there staring out at the grounds. He started at the sight of Harry. "Hello there, Harry," he said. "Just had an exam, I expect. Nearly finished." "Yeah," said Harry. Ron and Hermione, not being on speaking terms with the Minister of Magic, hovered awkwardly in the background. "Lovely day," said Fudge, casting an eye over the lake. Pity. He sighed deeply and looked down at Harry. "I'm here on an unpleasant mission, Harry. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures required a witness to the execution of a mad hippogriff. As I needed to visit Hogwarts to check on the black situation, I was asked to step in." "Does that mean the appeal's already happened?" Ron interrupted, stepping forward. No, it's scheduled for this afternoon," said Fudge, looking curiously at Ron. "Then you might not have to witness an execution at all," said Ron stoutly. "The hippogriff might get off." But before Fudge could answer, 2 wizards came through the castle doors behind him. One was so ancient he appeared to be withering before their very eyes. The other was tall and strapping, with a thin black moustache. Harry gathered that they were the representatives of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, because the very old wizard squinted toward Hagrid's cabin and said in a feeble voice, Dear, I'm getting too old for this. 2 o'clock, isn't it, Fudge?" The black moustached man was fingering something on his belt. Harry looked and saw that he was running one broad thumb along the blade of a shining axe. Ron opened his mouth to say something, but Hermione nudged him hard in the ribs and jerked her head toward the entrance hall. "Why'd you stop me?" Ron said angrily as they entered the great hall for lunch. "Did you see them? They've even got an axe ready. This isn't justice." "Ron, your dad works for the ministry. You can't go saying things like that to his boss," said Hermione, but she too looked very upset. "As long as Hagrid keeps his head this time and argues his case properly, they can't possibly execute Buckbeak." But Harry could tell Hermione didn't really believe what she was saying. All around them, people were talking excitedly as they ate their lunch, happily anticipating the end of the exams that afternoon, but Harry, Ron and Hermione, lost in worry about Hagrid and Buckbeak, didn't join in. Harry and Ron's last exam was divination, Hermione's Muggle studies. They walked up the marble staircase together. Hermione left them on the first floor, and Harry and Ron proceeded all the way up to the 7th, where many of their class were sitting on the spiral staircase to Professor Trelawney's classroom, trying to cram in a last 5-minute session of revision. "She's seeing us all separately," Neville informed him as they sat down next to him. He had his copy of Unfogging the Future open in his lap as the pages devoted to crystal gazing. "Have any of you ever seen anything in a crystal ball?" he asked them unhappily. "Nope," said Ron in an offhand voice. He kept checking his watch. Harry knew he was counting down the time until Buckbeak's appeal started. The queue of people outside the classroom shortened very slowly. As each person climbed back down the silver ladder, the rest of the class hissed, "What did she ask? Was it okay?" But they all refused to say. "She says the crystal balls told her that if I tell you, I'll have a horrible accident," squeaked Neville as he clambered back down the ladder towards Harry and Ron, who had now reached the landing. "That's convenient," snorted Ron. "You know, I'm starting to think Hermione was right about her." He jabbed his thumb toward the trap door ahead. "She's a right old fraud." "Yeah," said Harry, looking at his own watch. It was now 2 o'clock. "Wish she'd hurry up." Parvati came back down the ladder, glowing with pride. "She says I've got all the makings of a true seer," she informed Harry and Ron. "I saw loads of stuff." "Well, good luck." She hurried down the spiral staircase toward Lavender. "Ronald Weasley," said the familiar misty voice from over their heads. Ron grimaced at Harry and climbed the silver ladder out of sight. Harry was now the only person left to be tested. He settled himself on the floor with his back against the wall, listening to a fly buzzing in the sunny window, his mind across the grounds with Hagrid. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Ronald's large feet reappeared on the ladder. "How'd it go?" Harry asked him, standing up. "Rubbish," said Ron. "Couldn't see a thing, so I made up some stuff. Don't think she was convinced, though." "Meet you in the common room," Harry muttered, as Professor Trelawney's voice called, "Harry Potter." The tower room was hotter than before. The curtains were closed, the fire was alight, and the usual sickly scent made Harry cough as he stumbled through the clutter of chairs and tables to where Professor Trelawney sat waiting for him before a large crystal ball. "Good day, my dear," she said softly. "If you would kindly gaze into the orb. Take your time now, and then tell me what you see within it." Harry bent over the crystal ball and stared as hard as he could, willing it to show him something other than swirling white fog, but nothing happened. "Well," Professor Trelawney prompted delicately, "what do you see?" The heat was overpowering, and his nostrils were stinging with the perfumed smoke wafting from the fire behind him. He thought of what Ron had just said and decided to pretend. Said Harry. "A dark shape. What does it resemble?" whispered Professor Trelawney. "Think now." Harry cast his mind about and it landed on Buckbeak. "A hippogriff," he said firmly. "Indeed," whispered Professor Trelawney, scribbling keenly on the parchment perched upon her knees. "My boy, you may well be seeing the outcome of poor Hagrid's trouble with the Ministry of Magic. Look closer. Does the hippogriff appear to have its head?" "Yes," said Harry firmly. "Are you sure?" Professor Trelawney urged him. "Are you quite sure, dear? You don't see it writhing on the ground, perhaps, and a shadowy figure raising an axe behind it?" "No," said Harry, starting to feel slightly sick. "No blood? No weeping Hagrid?" "No," said Harry again, wanting more than ever to leave the room and the heat. "It looks fine. It's flying away." Professor Trelawney sighed. "Well, dear, I think we'll leave it here. A little disappointing, but I'm sure you did your best." Relieved, Harry got up, picked up his bag, and turned out. Then a loud, harsh voice spoke behind him. "It will happen tonight." Harry wheeled around. Professor Trelawney had gone rigid in her armchair. Her eyes were unfocused and her mouth was sagging. Sorry," said Harry. But Professor Trelawney didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes started to roll. Harry stood there in a panic. She looked as though she were about to have some sort of seizure. He hesitated, thinking of running to the hospital wing, and then Professor Trelawney spoke again, in the same harsh voice, quite unlike her own. "The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned by his followers. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever before. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will set out to rejoin His master. Professor Trelawney's head fell forward onto her chest. She made a sort of grunting noise. Then quite suddenly her head snapped up again. "I'm so sorry, dear boy," she said dreamily. "The heat of the day, you know. I drifted off for a moment." Harry stood there, still staring. "Is there something wrong, my dear?" You just told me that the Dark Lord's going to rise again, that his servant's going to go back to him." Professor Trelawney looked thoroughly startled. "The Dark Lord? He who must not be named? My dear boy, that's hardly something to joke about. Rise again, indeed." "But you just said it. You said the Dark Lord." "I think you must have dozed off too, my dear," said Professor Trelawney. "I would certainly not presume to predict anything quite as far-fetched as that." Harry climbed back down the ladder and the spiral staircase, wondering, had he just heard Professor Trelawney make a real prediction, or had that been her idea of an impressive end to the test? 5 minutes later he was dashing past the security trolls outside the entrance to Gryffindor Tower, Professor Trelawney's words still resounding in his head. People were striding past him in the opposite direction, laughing and joking, heading for the grounds in a bit of long-awaited freedom. By the time he reached the portrait hall and entered the common room, it was almost deserted. Over in a corner, however, sat Ron and Hermione. "Professor Trelawney," Harry panted, "just told me—" But he stopped abruptly at the sight of their faces. "Buckbeak lost," Ron said weakly. "Hagrid's just sent this." Hagrid's note was dry this time. No tears had splattered it, yet his hands seemed to have shaken so much as he wrote it that it was hardly legible. "Lost appeal. They're going to do the execution at sunset. Nothing you can do. Don't come down. I don't want you to see it. Hagrid." "We've got to go," said Harry at once. "He can't just sit there on his own waiting for the executioner." "Sunset, though," said Ron, who was staring out of the window in a glazed sort of way. "We'd never be allowed, especially you, Harry." Harry sank on his head onto his hands, thinking, if only we had the invisibility cloak. "Where is it?" said Hermione. Harry told her about leaving it in the passageway under the one-eyed witch. "If Snape sees me anywhere near there again, I'm in serious trouble." "That's true," said Hermione, getting to her feet. "If he sees you, how do you open the witch's hump again?" "You tap it, and you say, 'Descendium,'" said Harry. But Hermione didn't wait for the rest of his sentence. She strode out of the room, pushed the fat lady's portrait open, and vanished from sight. "She hasn't got to get it," Ron said, staring after her. She had. Hermione returned a quarter of an hour later with the silvery cloak folded carefully under her robes. "Hermione, I don't know what's got into you lately," said Ron, astounded. "First you hit Malfoy, then you walk out on Professor Trelawney." Hermione looked rather flattered. They went down to dinner with everyone else, but did not return to Gryffindor Tower afterward. Harry had the cloak hidden down the front of his robes. He had to keep his arms folded to hide the lump. Then they skulked in an empty chamber off the entrance hall, listening until they were sure it was deserted. They heard a last pair of people hurrying across the hall and a door slamming. Hermione poked her head around the door. "Okay," she whispered. "No one here. Cloak on." Walking very close together so that no one could see them, they crossed the hall on tiptoe beneath the cloak, then walked down the stone steps onto the grounds. The sun was already sinking behind the forbidden forest, gliding the top branches of the trees. They reached Hagrid's cabin and knocked. He was a minute in answering, and when he did, he looked around for his visitor, pale-faced and trembling. "It's us," Harry hissed. "We're wearing the invisibility cloak. Let us in and we can take it off." "You shouldn't have come," Hagrid whispered, but he stood back and they stepped inside. Hagrid shut the door quickly and Harry pulled off the cloak. Hagrid was not crying, nor did he throw himself upon their necks. He looked like a man who did not know where he was or what to do. This helplessness was worse to watch than tears. "Want some tea?" he said. His great hands were shaking as he reached for the kettle. "Where's Buckbeak, Hagrid?" said Hermione hesitantly. I took him outside," said Hagrid, spilling milk all over the table as he filled up the jug. "He's tethered in me pumpkin patch. Thought he ought to see the trees and smell fresh air before—" Hagrid's hand trembled so violently that the milk jug slipped from his grasp and shattered all over the floor. "I'll do it, Hagrid," said Hermione quickly, hurrying over and starting to clean up the mess. "There's another one in the cupboard," said Hagrid, sitting down and wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Harry glanced at Ron, who looked back hopelessly. "Isn't there anything anyone can do, Hagrid?" Harry asked fiercely, sitting down next to him. "Dumbledore—" "He's tried," said Hagrid. He's got no power to overrule the committee. He told them Buckbeak's all right, but they're scared. You know what Lucius Malfoy's like. Threatened him, I expect. And the executioner, McNair, he's an old pal of Malfoy's. But he'll be quick and clean, and I'll be outside with him." Hagrid swallowed. His eyes were darting all over the cabin, as though looking for some shred of hope or comfort. "Dumbledore's gonna come down while it happens. Wrote me this morning. Says he wants ter be with me. Great man, Dumbledore." Hermione, who'd been rummaging in Hagrid's cupboard for another milk jug, let out a small, quickly stifled sob. She straightened up with the new jug in her hands, fighting back tears. "We'll stay with you too, Hagrid," she began, but Hagrid shook his shaggy head. "You're to go back up to the castle. I told you I don't want your watching. And you shouldn't be down here anyway. If Fudge and Dumbledore catch you out here without permission, Harry, you'll be in big trouble." Silent tears were now streaming down Hermione's face, but she hid them from Hagrid, bustling around making tea. Then, as she picked up the milk bottle to pour some more into the jug, she let out a shriek. "Ron! I don't believe it! It's Scabbers!" Ron stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Hermione carried the milk jug over to the table and turned it upside down. With a frantic squeak and much scrambling to get back inside, Scabbers the rat came sliding out onto the table. "Scabbers?" Ron said blankly. "Scabbers, what are you doing here?" He grabbed the struggling rat and held him to the light. Scabbers looked dreadful. He was thinner than ever, large tufts of hair had fallen out, leaving wide bald patches, and he writhed in Ron's hands as though desperate to free himself. "It's okay, Scabbers," said Ron. "No cats. There's nothing here to hurt you." Hagrid suddenly stood up, his eyes fixed on the window. His normally ruddy face had gone the colour of parchment. "They're coming." Harry, Ron and Hermione whipped round. A group of men walking down the distant castle steps. In front was Albus Dumbledore, his silver beard gleaming in the dying sun. Next to him trotted Cornelius Fudge. Behind them came the feeble old committee member and the executioner, McNair. "You gotta go," said Hagrid. Every inch of him was trembling. "They mustn't find you here. Go on now." Ron stuffed Scabbers into his pocket and Hermione picked up the cloak. I'll let you out the back way." They followed him to the door back into his garden. Harry felt strangely unreal, even more so than when he saw Buckbeak a few yards away, tethered to a tree behind Hagrid's pumpkin patch. Buckbeak seemed to know something was happening. He turned his sharp head from side to side and pawed the ground nervously. "It's okay, Beaky," said Hagrid softly. "It's okay." He turned to Harry, Ron and Hermione. "Go on," he said. "Get going." But they didn't move.
"Hagrid, we can't. We'll tell them what really happened. They can't kill him."
"Go," said Hagrid fiercely. "It's bad enough without you lot in trouble and all." They had no choice. As Hermione threw the cloak over Harry and Ron, they heard voices at the front of the cabin. Hagrid looked at the place where they had just vanished from sight. "Go quick," he said hoarsely. "Don't listen." And he strode back into his cabin as though someone knocked on the front door. Slowly, in a kind of horrified trance, Harry, Ron and Hermione set off silently around Hagrid's house. As they reached the other side, the front door closed with a sharp snap.
"Please, let's hurry," Hermione whispered. "I can't stand it. I can't bear it."
They started up the sloping lawn toward the castle. The sun was sinking fast now. The sky had turned to a clear purple-tinged grey, but to the west there was a ruby-red glow. Ron stopped dead.
"Oh, please, Ron,"
Hermione began. "Scabbers, he won't stay put." Ron was bent over, trying to keep Scabbers in his pocket, but the rat was going berserk, squeaking madly, twisting and flailing, trying to sink his teeth into Ron's hand. "Scabbers, it's me, you idiot! It's Ron!" Ron hissed. They heard a door open behind them in men's voices.
"Oh, Ron, please, let's move. They're going to do it,"
Hermione breathed. "Okay, Scabbers, stay put!" They walked forwards. Harry, like Hermione, was trying not to listen to the rumble of voices behind them. Ron stopped again. "I can't hold him. Scabbers, shut up! Everyone will hear us." The rat was squealing wildly, but not loudly enough to cover up the sounds drifting from Hagrid's cabin. There was a jumble of indistinct male voices, a silence, and then, without warning, the unmistakable swish and thud of an axe. Hermione swayed on the spot.
"They did it," she whispered to Harry. I don't believe it. They did it."
Buckbeak. Makes me hate Malfoys even more.
Right.
But yeah, Scabbers is alive.
Yeah, what do you know?
Mm-hmm. I guess that's why Crookshanks was out in the forest.
He's looking for him.
Yep.
He hasn't given up yet.
Nope.
He's a
He knows
cat
he
on a
was
mission.
alive.
Hiding in Hagrid's house.
It's probably why the person tried to attack Ron with a knife. He was in there looking for Scabbers.
The person?
Yeah.
Oh, Sirius Black.
Yeah.
Could be.
I still hold on to the belief that Scabbers is a person.
Well, that theory hasn't been proven untrue.
Mm-hmm.
Hasn't been proven true, but it hasn't been proven untrue.
That's true. Trelawney, though, acting a little weird.
Yeah, do you think she actually made a real prediction? Or do you think she is just kind of nuts? Or has an
I mean,
issue?
I know she's nuts, but...
Well, do you think
I'm
she
going-
has some kind of illness?
Illness?
Like some weird type of epilepsy? Or do you think she made a prediction, like a real one?
I'm gonna say she made a real one. I'm gonna say at midnight we kind of get our answers at who Lupin is, or the Grim werewolf, whatever the big dog is, and Crookshanks and Scabbers.
Do you know what the next chapter is called?
The Grim?
Nope.
The Reveal?
Nope. Cat, rat, and dog.
Hey! Maybe I would be good at divination.
Maybe you would.
I'm a true seer,
Maybe
without
you-
even trying.
Maybe you have the sight, my dear. I mean, we'll find out.
Suppose we will. See how accurate my predictions were. On them, at least.
What's up with Scabbers? Like, he's just like freaking out. Like, does not want to be in Ron's pocket. Wants nothing to do with Ron. Is biting the shit out of him.
Well, they obviously know that Scabbers belongs to Ron. Crookshanks keeps trying to kill him. And then there was a man with a knife trying to get at Scabbers. Allegedly, we'll say.
Allegedly.
But I'm going to assume that's why he came in there and with a knife hovered over him and didn't, like, kill Ron or anything.
Right.
Just was like, oh, the rat's gone. And dipped.
Why would he want to kill the rat?
Because I kind of hold on to the theory that it's Peter Pettigrew.
If it is.
Pettigrew. What was it?
Peter Pettigrew.
Pettigrew. Okay.
But, why would you want to kill Peter Pettigrew?
Maybe he was the true one that betrayed Harry's family.
And it wasn't serious?
Yeah.
How do you figure that? If Sirius was the Potter's secret keeper.
Well, Peter Pettigrew was like one of their friends.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Sirius let it slip to him, and then he went back to Voldemort.
I really feel like that's not something that Sirius would do. Well, I mean, I don't know.
So you're saying Sirius didn't give him up? He wouldn't even tell Peter Pettigrew, but he would tell Voldemort?
Well, if Peter Pettigrew is a good guy, and Sirius is working for Voldemort, he would tell Voldemort. But he wouldn't necessarily... Well, I don't know if he would necessarily tell Peter Pettigrew, because if he did, then the Potters would be like, what'd you tell him for? You're supposed to be the only one that knows. For everyone's safety. I don't know. Even though he is their friend. That's like still something you just don't just telling people. Because if he tells Peter Pettigrew, and then what if they catch Peter Pettigrew and, like, weasel it out of him?
Maybe that's what happened. Or maybe Peter Pettigrew didn't know where they were, but he knew that Sirius Black was the keeper. And Voldemort did, the whole torturing thing got out of him. Who knows what types of dark arts Voldemort knows? Well, I'm sure you do, but
I do.
He might be able to just, somehow get in there and get it out.
Oh, the things you'll learn about what Voldemort can do. Oh my goodness. Oh, man.
I'm sure it couldn't be any worse than what I've learned in Game of Thrones.
No. But there are some pretty horrifying things that Voldemort does to people. And his followers have done to people.
Oh, I'm sure.
Not necessarily Ramsay Bolton levels of things, but I don't think anyone is Ramsay Bolton levels of things. Voldemort may not necessarily, do that to you, but he could definitely maybe create an illusion that that is happening to you.
In one of the chapters, can't remember where they read it in a book or it's mentioned, there's some curse where it's like a torture curse. You're in constant pain or something like that. And then I know in the book that they were reading to get the Polyjuice potion, they saw the spell where it actually turns the person inside out.
Yeah, it was some kind of potion that it turns someone inside. When I read that part, every time I read that part, I think of the first episode of Full Metal Alchemist when they conjure the mass of body goo. I don't know what else to call it. With the ribs and everything sticking out. That's what I picture in my head every time I read about that. I'm like, that's what it looks like in a brain. When you turn someone inside out.
Yuck.
Or when they...
I don't even know what it would be like. It would just be removing their skin? Or
does it turn them completely inside out?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You start at the mouth and then you turn a sock inside out. Just...
Is that how it works? What if they didn't start at your mouth?
Ow.
They turned you inside out the other way.
I mean, either way, it's not a good time.
No. Oh. There are some very specific things you'll learn in book 4.
Oh, 4. I was about to finish that and say book 6, but...
Nope, there are some very specific things you'll learn in book 4. Dark magic things that at least give you some introduction into the world of dark magic.
Oh. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And just to come right back to it, Buckbeak's dead.
Yeah.
No justice for animals in the world. Even in the wizarding world, there's no justice for animals.
No.
Poor Buckbeak.
Do they destroy the council?
Who?
I don't know, Harry, Ron, and them at any point in the stories.
The Council for the Disposal of Magical Creatures?
Yeah.
No.
Could we tell them that they wronged Voldemort in some way so he could go turn them inside out?
No. McNair will be back, though. I feel like that's not really a spoiler. I can tell you that. The Executioner guy will be back.
Yeah.
I mean, that old man that showed up, I mean, by book 7, that guy could be dead for all I know. He's a million years old. He could have had a heart attack between this book and book 7. I don't know. The rest of this book is literally just hurtling very quickly towards having all of your theories answered. Yes or no?
I know, I can't wait.
Uh-huh.
Can't wait to say I told you so again.
Are you telling me so? I know. Whether you're right or wrong about stuff.
Well, it's your job to say I'm wrong, so it's my job to then come back and say, aha, I knew it.
So we get to chapter 22 and you're going to be like, aha, I told you Lupin was Sirius Black.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Okay. Alright.
Or any of my other predictions. I can honestly remember all my theories.
This is what we got. Lupin is a werewolf. Scabbers is an animagus. Scabbers
Animagus? Animagi?
That's plural.
Oh, is it?
Animagi is plural.
Oh.
Animagus is singular.
No, because, McGonagall calls herself an animagi.
No, she doesn't. She talks about them. An animagus is a singular. Do you want me to get through the book?
No, that's fine. I'm just wondering if it was something with octopus. You
No.
know, moose.
No.
Where it has no plural, really.
No. Scabbers is Sirius Black or Lupin was an early theory. But I think you've switched that to now you firmly believe that Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that.
Okay. Sirius Black is in fact not a bad guy. Sirius Black is Lupin. Peter Pettigrew is the one who really sold out Harry's parents. The orb that Lupin sees, if he's Sirius Black, is the orb a physical manifestation of Sirius Black's memories?
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. I can't even remember how I really came up to that. I was just kind of reaching for something to do with the orb.
I think it was because we were talking about whether or not it was a crystal ball. I think it was during that chapter where they all have Christmas dinner together.
Yeah.
And Trelawney's like, where's Lupin? Why isn't he here?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so yeah, my theories.
Alright, and on that note, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join us next time for Chapter 17, Cat, Rat, and Dog.